A stone wall can survive centuries of earthquakes that flatten modern cities. The Inca built these impossible structures without iron tools or even the wheel. By the end of this, you will understand the forgotten engineering principles that make their stonework virtually indestructible. How did they move 100-ton blocks over mountains? And why does their masonry actually dance during a quake? This is a story of human ingenuity forged in one of the most volatile landscapes on Earth. What does true resilience look like when you cannot force nature to obey? This landscape does not simply experience earthquakes. It is an earthquake, a continent in a state of perpetual, grinding creation. The Andes are being born, inch by catastrophic inch, as one tectonic plate dives beneath another. For the people living here, the ground was never a promise of stillness. It was a living, breathing entity with a volatile temper. This was the crucible that forged Inca thinking. You do not build a city hoping the earth will be kind. You build knowing it will one day try to destroy your work. Their challenge was not merely architectural. It was philosophical. How do you create something meant to last forever when the very definition of forever includes regular, violent upheaval? They had no steel to reinforce their dreams, no concrete to bind their ambitions. Only stone, bronze, and a profound understanding of their world. This understanding began not with engineering manuals, but with observation. Archaeoseismologists, scientists who study past earthquakes through archaeology, note that the Inca saw their environment as a sacred, interconnected whole. Mountains were not inanimate piles of rock. They were apus, living mountain spirits, deities whose movements and moods shaped reality. To build against such a force would be an act of arrogance, inviting disaster. Instead, their architecture sought harmony. It was a dialogue with the earth, not a declaration of war. This worldview is the invisible foundation upon which every stone was set. Before we examine how their walls were assembled, we must appreciate why they were conceived this way. In an age where we often seek to dominate nature with ever more complex technology, what might we learn from an ancient philosophy that chose instead to listen and adapt? This reverence for the living earth guided their hands to the first, most critical decision: which stones were worthy of bearing such a sacred, enduring weight. The sound of a hammer striking stone echoed across the high valleys, a precise and searching percussion. This was not the sound of construction, but of diagnosis. Before a single block was shaped, before a journey down a mountainside was even contemplated, Inca engineers engaged in a profound act of listening. They sought a specific, ringing resonance, a clear tone that signaled a stone's internal integrity. This quest for the perfect rock was the sacred first principle of their architecture, a non-negotiable foundation for everything that would follow. Not all stone was created equal in their eyes. While they worked with what was available, they demonstrated a masterful, intuitive understanding of material properties. They favored dense, crystalline igneous rocks like andesite and diorite, stones forged in the very volcanic fires that shaped their landscape. These rocks possessed immense compressive strength. More importantly, their granular, interlocking crystal structures allowed them to absorb and dissipate seismic energy, bending ever so slightly rather than snapping catastrophically under stress. A brittle limestone or sandstone might be easier to carve, but it would become a deadly liability when the earth began to move. Their selection process was astonishingly thorough. Teams would traverse cliff faces, identifying natural fracture lines in the bedrock. They tested for homogeneity, ensuring the stone was free of hidden flaws or weak seams. In some quarries, evidence suggests they used a technique called fire setting, lighting controlled fires against the rock face and then dousing it with water. The rapid thermal shock would crack the bedrock along predictable lines, a clever method of extraction without metal wedges. One of the most powerful testaments to this initial, monumental effort is the quarry at Cachacata, near the Fortress of Ollantaytambo. Here, the mountainside is littered with giants, partially extracted blocks the size of small houses still clinging to the bedrock, as if frozen in the act of being born. These are the raw ingredients of empire, chosen with a care we might reserve for selecting a diamond. This meticulous beginning solved the first half of the equation. It provided a resilient, energetic material, but it created a staggering new problem. How do you move a 100-ton symphony of solid rock from a mountain peak to a distant valley floor without wheels, without draft animals stronger than a llama, and without iron chains? The answer lies in a second principle, one that transformed the landscape itself into a tool. The chosen stones now faced their greatest trial, a journey that defied every modern expectation of efficiency. Picture a 100-ton block of andesite, a small building in itself, perched on a mountainside. The destination is a temple complex miles away, across a deep river gorge and up a steep valley slope. The Inca solution was not a single miraculous technology, but a symphony of simple physics and staggering human coordination. They transformed friction from an enemy into a controlled, manageable force. On gentle slopes, they likely used log rollers, teams of workers levering the stone forward as others constantly repositioned the wooden cylinders behind it. For steeper descents, they built sledges and crafted special earthen causeways which they kept slick with wet clay, effectively creating a primitive but effective slipway. The ropes for these operations were engineering marvels in their own right, woven from tough llama hide or plant fibers into cables thick enough to anchor a ship, capable of distributing immense strain without snapping. This was a logistics network of muscle and mind. They understood that moving such mass required a perfectly balanced application of force. Historical accounts and experimental archaeology suggest this was not a chaotic heave but a rhythmic, pulsing effort. Overseers might have used drums or chants to synchronize the pull of hundreds of workers, turning a physical impossibility into a slow, inevitable procession. The system that mobilized this workforce was known as the Mita, a rotational labor tax that drew upon communities across the empire. It was not slavery, but a communal duty, a shared contribution to projects that benefited all, from terraced agriculture to these sacred, protective structures. In some cases, they even harnessed water itself, floating smaller but still massive stones on bundles of reeds called totora boats, using the current of rivers to assist their journey. The most stunning testament to this transport art is the unfinished megalith at Ollantaytambo's Sun Temple. This monstrous slab of red porphyry was quarried from a site high on the opposite side of the Urubamba River. To reach the temple mount, it had to be dragged down one mountain across the rushing river and then hauled up a specially constructed ramp on the other side. The ramp itself, a zigzagging monument of earth and stone, still scars the hillside today, a permanent sketch of the ambition required. Each inch of progress was a victory of collective will over gravity. Yet this Herculean effort of movement was merely the prelude. Delivering the stone to the building site was one thing. The true magic, the act that would make these walls earthquake-proof, began when the stonecutter's tools finally met the rock. The journey was over. Now the conversation with the stone would begin. The stonecutter's tools were extensions of a philosophy, not just of his hands. With no iron saws to slice through rock or steel drills to bore perfect holes, the Inca developed a third principle, a dialogue of patience between stone and stone. Their entire toolkit could be summarized in a handful of simple objects: hammerstones, river cobbles selected for their exceptional hardness, bronze chisels valuable and reserved for the finest detailing, and abrasive sands used like a primitive sandpaper for the final polish. The core technique was called pounding and grinding, a craftsman would take a hammerstone and begin a rhythmic, percussive dance against the face of a granite block. Each strike was not a wild blow, but a controlled tap designed to exploit the natural crystalline structure of the rock. The impact would create a tiny, conchoidal fracture, flaking off a small piece of the surface. Do this once and you make a dent. Do it 10,000 times and you create a flat plane. Do it for months and you sculpt a masterpiece. This was subtractive art on a geological timescale. The process was broken into deliberate stages. Initial rough shaping happened right at the quarry, reducing the megalith to a more manageable form. Then, at the construction site, the finer dressing would begin. This is where the real artistry emerged. By studying the tool marks left on unfinished blocks, archaeologists can trace the systematic work. Craftsmen would create a series of raised bumps or bosses on the stone surface. These weren't mistakes, they were handles, both physical and visual. Workers could grip these bosses to maneuver the block into position with ropes and levers. More importantly, these protrusions served as guides. The masons would gradually grind down the high points until the entire face met the same perfect plane. The final stage involved using wet sand and smoother stones to polish the surface to a finish that could feel almost glassy to the touch. The evidence of this immense labor is littered across every major site. Walk the grounds of Sacsayhuamán or Ollantaytambo, and you will find piles of discarded hammerstones, each one worn down to a smooth, oval shape from years of relentless use. They are the physical echoes of that patient percussion. This unimaginable investment of time was not for vanity. That flawless surface, achieved through millions of deliberate strikes, was the only possible prerequisite for the technique that would make these walls immortal. The precision of the fit was everything, because the final, revolutionary step was not about glue or mortar. It was about creating a joint so perfect that it became a living, moving connection. The wall before you is a conversation frozen in stone. It is a symphony of irregular angles, a three-dimensional jigsaw where no two pieces are alike. This is the fourth principle, the genesis of polygonal masonry, and it is here that Inca engineering transcends construction and enters the realm of genius. Do not mistake this for mere artistry. Every bizarre 12-sided block, every seemingly chaotic zigzag, is a deliberate and brilliant answer to a single, relentless question. How do you build something that does not break when the world shakes? The answer lies in abandoning the straight line. Modern masonry relies on uniform bricks and long, continuous mortar joints. In an earthquake, those straight lines become planes of weakness, a single crack that can propagate and bring down an entire wall. The Inca eliminated this vulnerability entirely. By crafting each stone into a unique, interlocking polygon, they created a continuous load-bearing structure. There are no straight lines of weakness, only a complex web of compressive force. During a seismic event, something remarkable happens. The stones are allowed to do what rigid, mortared blocks cannot. They can micro-shift, dancing against one another. The immense friction between their perfectly fitted faces converts the violent energy of the quake into heat and minor movement, dissipating the force throughout the entire wall. When the shaking stops, the stones simply settle back into place, locked once more by gravity and their own intricate geometry. The process of creating such a wall was an exercise in profound patience and spatial intelligence. It began with the largest foundational stones, often partially buried for stability. Then the masons would select the next block. They would not carve it to a predetermined shape. Instead, they would painstakingly dry fit it against its neighbors, marking points of contact, then take it down to recarve those specific surfaces. This trial and error ritual might be repeated dozens of times for a single stone. The unfinished knobs or bosses left on the faces were crucial here, acting as handles for this constant, grueling repositioning. The walls themselves were often built with a slight batter, meaning they tilt inward as they rise. This subtle angle lowers the center of gravity, making the entire structure more stable, like a pyramid resisting a push. Nowhere is this principle more spectacularly displayed than at the Fortress of Sacsayhuamán, perched above Cusco. Its iconic zigzagging walls are composed of stones so enormous that their purpose baffled early Spanish chroniclers, who could only attribute them to giants or demons. But look closer, the zigzag pattern is not a decorative whim. It is a seismic masterstroke. Each inward-pointing angle acts like a buttress, channeling and redirecting lateral forces. An earthquake wave hitting one of these protruding teeth is split and absorbed by the mass of stone behind it. The wall becomes an active participant in its own defense, a geological puzzle engineered to outlast time itself. This interconnected web was the macro-scale solution, but the true secret to its flexibility, the reason these megaliths could dance without falling, was hidden in the microscopic space between them. The final touch was not about locking the stones together, but about perfecting the space where they met. That microscopic space between the stones holds the fifth principle, the secret of the liquid joint. Run your finger along the seam where two Inca blocks meet. You will not feel a gap, you will feel a transition, as if the stone itself decided to flow into a new shape. This perfection in jointing is where the abstract philosophy of harmony becomes a tangible, physical reality. The goal was never to simply stack rocks. It was to create a continuous bearing surface, a single, unbroken skin of stone that could distribute weight and seismic shock evenly across the entire face of the wall. They achieved this through two primary styles, both serving the same ultimate function. The fine ashlar style uses elegant, rectangular blocks, seen in the most sacred spaces like the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun in Cusco. The more common and arguably more ingenious is the polygonal style with its interlocking puzzle of angles. Both demand the same impossible standard. A perfect fit, modern stonemasons who study these walls often express a kind of reverent disbelief. The tolerances they achieved, the space between those multi-ton blocks, are frequently less than the thickness of a credit card. To accomplish this with stone tools is an act of patience that borders on the spiritual. The process was a ritual of repetition and refinement. After the initial pounding and grinding shaped a block, the real work began. The masons would hoist it into position against its neighbors for a trial fit. They would then lower it and examine the contact points. Any high spots, any areas preventing a seamless union would be marked. They used simple, brilliant methods for this, daubing the faces of the adjoining stones with soot or wet clay before the test fit. When the block was removed, the colored material would be transferred only to the high points, creating a precise map of where to remove more stone. Then, with abrasive sand and water, they would grind those marked areas down, grain by microscopic grain. This cycle of fit, mark, and grind could be repeated dozens, even hundreds of times for a single stone. The genius extends into the subtlest of details. The faces of the blocks were not carved perfectly flat. They were given a slight, almost imperceptible convexity, a gentle swell in the very center of each face. This ensured that when the block was finally set, it made firm, edge-to-edge contact. The very center might have a minute void, but the critical load-bearing perimeter was in full, intimate contact. During the final, triumphant placement, they sometimes used a slurry of wet clay as a lubricant, allowing the massive block to slide perfectly into its eternal home. The clay would then dry and harden, falling out or eroding over centuries, leaving behind that famous knife-edge joint. The Coricancha in Cusco, the empire's most revered temple, showcases this principle in its most refined form. The joints in its surviving walls are so precise that they disappear in certain lights, creating the illusion of a single, carved mass. This meticulous attention to the interface did more than create a pretty wall. It forged a monolithic behavior from individual pieces. The wall began to act as one enormous, flexible unit. But to truly survive an earthquake, a structure must do more than just be strong. It must be clever, it must know how to move. The wall does not resist the earthquake, it participates in it. This is the sixth principle, the culmination of all that came before, the moment when static stone becomes a dynamic system. Visualize a seismic wave, a ripple of pure destructive force, traveling through the ground toward an Inca wall. It does not meet a rigid, brittle monolith. Instead, it encounters a flexible ensemble, a community of stones where each member can move independently, yet always in relation to its neighbors. This is dynamic load distribution, and it is the reason these walls are still standing. The secret lies in what they lack: rigid mortar. A mortared wall is glued together. It tries to behave as one solid piece. When the earth moves, that solid piece cannot flex, so it cracks and collapses. The Inca built a dry stone matrix. Between each perfectly fitted block is a tiny, forgiving space, a microscopic theater for controlled movement. When the quake hits, the seismic energy is not absorbed by breaking the stones. It is converted into kinetic energy, the energy of motion. The stones slide and rotate just a fraction of an inch against one another. The countless points of friction between their interlocking faces act like a million tiny breaks, absorbing and dampening the vibrations, transforming violent shaking into a gentle, complex dance. Then, when the shaking stops, gravity, that most patient and reliable of forces, simply pulls each stone back into its original alignment. Structural engineers sometimes compare it to a well-packed bag of marbles. Shake the bag and the marbles shift and settle against each other. Stop shaking and they find a new, stable arrangement. The wall is that bag of marbles, but engineered to always settle back into its intended, perfect form. This represents a fundamental choice between two types of failure. Modern materials often fail in a brittle way, like a pane of glass shattering. The Inca system was designed for ductile failure, a graceful, energy-absorbing shift. It bends so it does not break. The proof is written in the stones of Cusco. In the year 1650, a catastrophic earthquake struck the city. Colonial buildings, constructed with rigid mortar and straight lines, crumbled into rubble. Yet the foundations upon which many were built, the original Inca walls of the Coricancha temple, remained utterly intact. The Spanish architecture, trying to resist the earth, was defeated. The Inca architecture, designed to move with it, survived. This inherent flexibility was not left to chance. It was guided and enhanced by intentional design features that acted like choreographers for the stone's seismic dance. This architectural choice reaches its most elegant expression in the very openings of their world. Walk through an Inca doorway or peer into one of their wall niches, and you will notice something immediately different. The shape is not a familiar rectangle. It is a trapezoid, wider at the bottom and tapering gracefully inward toward the top. This distinctive form is far more than an artistic signature. It is the seventh principle, a masterclass in geometric intelligence applied to seismic survival. The trapezoid is a fundamentally stable shape. Under the violent lateral forces of an earthquake, a rectangular opening is vulnerable. The right-angled corners are stress concentrators, points where cracks can easily initiate and spread, threatening to collapse the lintel stone across the top. A trapezoid, by contrast, has no true corners. Its sloping sides naturally channel vertical loads downward, directly into the heart of the wall, eliminating the dangerous outward thrust that can blow a structure apart. Modern architects note that this form is inherently more resistant to shear, the sideways slicing force that is so destructive during seismic events. The Inca applied this wisdom universally. Trapezoidal shapes define their architecture, from the smallest storage niche to the grandest ceremonial portal. Even the overall profile of their walls often incorporates this logic through a subtle batter, a gentle inward incline as the wall rises. This slight tilt serves a dual purpose. It visually echoes the trapezoidal form, and it dramatically lowers the structure's center of gravity, making it far more difficult to topple. The effect is a building that feels rooted, as if growing from the bedrock itself. One of the most breathtaking examples of this principle, though from a culture that influenced the Inca, is the Gateway of the Sun at Tiwanaku. This monumental single-stone archway is a giant trapezoid, a testament to the ancient Andean understanding that stability could be carved into the very void. Every opening became an opportunity to reinforce. A window was not just a hole for light, but a carefully sculpted element that strengthened the wall around it. A doorway was an engineered channel for movement, both for people and for the dispersal of energy. This conscious shaping of space and mass meant their resilience was not an added feature. It was integrated, a seamless quality woven into the fabric of every wall, every room, every city from its very conception. The stones could dance, and the shapes that contained them knew exactly how to lead. Yet for all this brilliance in stone, their greatest engineering triumph may have been invisible, a foundational secret buried beneath their feet. The earth itself was the first stone they had to shape. Before any megalith could be set, before any wall could rise, the Inca engaged in a profound act of geotechnical conversation, the eighth principle of taming the slope. Their architecture did not conquer the mountain. It invited the mountain to become part of the structure. On vertiginous hillsides where modern builders would bring in dynamite and steel beams, Inca engineers began with a simple, radical act. They listened to the land, they assessed soil composition, understood water flow, and identified the true, unshakable bedrock beneath the surface. Then, with patience that seems superhuman, they would excavate. Teams would dig down, sometimes many feet, until they reached that solid foundation. Into this prepared cradle, they would lay a base course of their largest, most stable stones, partially burying them to anchor the entire future wall into the living earth. This was not just a foundation, it was a root system, but their mastery of the substrate extended far beyond single buildings. To create flat land for agriculture and settlements on impossible slopes, they built the iconic Andean terraces known as Andines. These were not simple stacked gardens, they were sophisticated geoengineering projects. Each retaining wall was constructed with the same polygonal precision as their sacred temples, designed to flex with seismic shifts. Behind these walls, the Inca didn't just dump soil, they built a complex, layered substrate. Archaeologists have cut into these terraces and found a carefully engineered profile. A bottom layer of large stones for drainage, then progressively smaller gravel, then sand, and finally rich topsoil. This acted as a giant, natural shock absorber and a perfect drainage system. During an earthquake, the gravel layers would shift and settle, dissipating energy before it could travel upwards. More critically, this design prevented a deadly phenomenon called liquefaction, where water-saturated soil during a quake suddenly behaves like a liquid, causing structures to sink and topple. The Inca's subterranean drainage channels, often hidden within the terrace fill, ensured water never built up to dangerous pressures. The result was a stable, breathing platform that could cradle life and withstand chaos. The ceremonial center of Moray is perhaps the ultimate expression of this principle. Its colossal, concentric circular terraces sink deep into the earth like a stone amphitheater built for the gods of geology. While its microclimate served as an agricultural laboratory, its very form is a lesson in foundation engineering. Each curved wall stabilizes the next, and the entire complex manages hydrological and seismic forces with an elegance that still leaves engineers in awe. By sculpting the earth with such reverence and understanding, the Inca ensured that the majestic structures above did not just sit on the land. they grew from it with a resilience woven into every layer from the bedrock up to the sky. The city itself was a living mechanism of survival. From the air, an Inca settlement like Machu Picchu reveals its final, masterful principle, urban planning as seismic engineering. It does not impose a rigid grid upon the mountain, but flows with its contours like a second skin of stone. This was the ninth principle, the wisdom of the sacred city layout, where resilience was woven into the very streets and plazas. Their goal was to prevent the kind of catastrophic, resonant collapse that can devastate modern cities with dense blocks of uniform buildings. The Inca solution was decentralized, low-rise construction punctuated by abundant open space. They avoided long, continuous facades that could act like dominoes. Instead, they built in clusters, with important structures often anchored directly to prominent outcrops of bedrock. Residential compounds were separated by terraced gardens, winding pathways, and small plazas. These open areas were not just for community life, they were deliberate shock absorbers. During an earthquake, they provided zones where energy could dissipate harmlessly into the ground, and they prevented a single, massive wave of destruction from traveling unimpeded through the urban fabric. Urban planners studying these sites note the intentional segmentation. Even long retaining walls are broken by staircases or changes in direction, ensuring that if one section were compromised, the failure would not propagate. Water management was integrated into this safety design. The intricate network of stone channels that fed fountains and baths also served as ready-made fire breaks and clear movement corridors in the aftermath of a seismic event, helping to prevent secondary disasters. Machu Picchu stands as the ultimate testament to this holistic vision. The city is clearly divided into distinct agricultural, urban, and religious sectors, each stepping down the mountainside. These zones are connected not by enclosing walls, but by a web of staircases and pathways. This layout respects the topography while ensuring no single area bears a dangerous concentration of mass. A tremor shaking the Temple of the Sun would find its path broken by the empty expanse of the central plaza before reaching the residential areas. This was engineering at the scale of community, a recognition that a single perfect wall means little if the city around it is poised to collapse. Their wisdom was applied at every level, from the microscopic fit of a stone to the grand plan of a mountaintop sanctuary. Yet this entire, magnificent system of knowledge, this profound dialogue with the earth, raises a haunting and inevitable question. If their engineering was so advanced, so perfectly adapted to their world, why did their empire ultimately fall? The answer lies not in a failure of stone, but in a collision of worlds for which no wall could ever be prepared. The final stone was not just placed, it was offered. This distinction is the key that unlocks the entire system. To comprehend the how of Inca engineering, we must first listen to the why that echoed in their hearts. For them, the world was not a collection of inert materials waiting to be used. It was a living, breathing, sacred community. The mountains were Apu's powerful protective deities. The earth was Pachamama, a nurturing mother. To build upon her was not an act of domination, but a form of conversation. This world, you transformed every construction site from a workplace into a temple, and every stone into a participant in a spiritual covenant. The driving philosophy was Aini, a profound principle of sacred reciprocity. It was the understanding that all existence is connected in a web of mutual exchange. If you take from the earth, you must give back with equal care and respect. The meticulous selection of stone, the patient grinding of a joint, the generational effort to move a single block, these were not merely technical steps. They were acts of devotion, offerings of time and skill presented to the Apus and Pachamama. In return, the builders believed the living earth would grant protection and stability to their work. This is why their architecture sought eternity. It was not for human glory or legacy. It was to create a worthy companion for the timeless landscape, a fitting tribute to deities who measured time in millennia. Experts in Andean cosmology note that this spiritual framework motivated a scale of patience that seems alien to our modern sensibilities. A project that would take a single lifetime was considered a beginning. Work that spanned generations was a sacred thread connecting ancestors to descendants, all engaged in the same ongoing act of reciprocity. The wall was not finished when the last stone was set. It was completed when it had withstood its first earthquake, proving the covenant was honored. This cultural context transforms what we see from clever engineering into a profound expression of values. It answers the question of how they sustained such focus. The craftsman shaping a block for a year was not performing a tedious job. He was practicing a form of meditation, a slow, deliberate prayer made solid. When we view their work through this lens, the precision is not just impressive, it is deeply moving. It poses a reflective question for our own time. In an age of rapid extraction and disposable construction, what might we learn from a civilization that viewed nature not as a resource to be exploited, but as a partner to be honored? Does this ancient sense of partnership hold the seed for truly sustainable and resilient design? The stones of Machu Picchu are a silent testament to a world built on dialogue, a resilience forged not in defiance of nature, but in sacred conversation with it. This spiritual foundation was the compass that guided every decision, from the grandest urban plan to the smallest tool stroke. And it is this very worldview that makes the empire's eventual encounter with a foreign power so tragically poignant, a clash where one side understood the language of the earth and the other spoke only the language of conquest. The joints between the stones are so tight they seem to defy the very idea of a separate piece. For centuries, the explanation appeared elegantly simple, a triumph of pure friction and gravity. Yet the deeper science looks, the more this mortarless bond whispers of hidden complexities. Could there be more to this story than perfectly ground rock? A growing edge of archaeological research is probing the tantalizing possibility that the Inca secret involved something that has since vanished. The consensus, firmly supported by most structural engineers, is that these are indeed masterworks of dry stone construction. The stability comes from the interlocking geometry and immense compressive weight, a conclusion backed by the wall's enduring performance through countless quakes. However, a few researchers studying microscopic residues have begun to ask provocative questions. When you achieve a fit with tolerances thinner than a sheet of paper, even the slightest surface treatment could have a profound effect. Some hypotheses suggest the Inca may have used a thin slurry during construction, not as a glue but as a final stage interface. One theory points to the sap of certain local plants, like the muña or the lareta, which could have been applied as a temporary lubricant. This would have allowed the masons that last, perfect slide to seat a multi-ton block with hairline precision. As the organic paste dried and hardened over decades, it might have formed a weak cementitious bond, effectively locking the micro-irregularities of the two stone faces together. Materials scientists note that some plant compounds interact with the minerals in andesite and granite, potentially creating a very thin chemical bridge over centuries. Investigations have turned to soil samples carefully extracted from within the joints themselves, searching for traces of organic compounds or unusual mineral deposits. While conclusive evidence remains elusive, the search is informed by practices in other ancient cultures, from the lime mortars of the Romans to the mysterious stone paste of other pre-Columbian civilizations. This ongoing debate does not diminish the Inca achievement, it deepens it. It reminds us that their sophistication may have extended into material science we are only beginning to detect. Whether the bond was purely mechanical or subtly enhanced by a lost organic art, the result was the same, a wall that became one with itself. And it is this unified strength that would face its ultimate, unforeseen test not from the earth below, but from a storm of steel and disease arriving from across the ocean. Rising above the old Inca capital, the Fortress of Sacsayhuamán is not just a structure, it is a geological argument carved in stone. Its iconic zigzagging walls, built from blocks that dwarf buses, represent the absolute zenith of the principles we have explored, a fusion of military might and seismic genius made permanent. To walk its ramparts is to take a masterclass in ancient engineering, where every curve and angle serves a deliberate dual purpose. The site's most famous feature is its three massive, terraced walls, each one a sinuous line of protruding teeth stretching for hundreds of yards. This distinctive zigzag is the first clue to its brilliance. In a seismic event, an earthquake wave approaching a straight wall hits a single, unbroken plane. At Sacsayhuamán, that wave is confronted by a series of sharp, projecting bastions. Each protruding angle acts like a ship's prow cutting through water, fracturing and redirecting the lateral force sideways into the immense mass of fill behind the wall. The energy is broken apart before it can build into a unified, destructive surge. This design did not arise from arbitrary choice. The entire complex is anchored directly onto a natural outcrop of diorite bedrock, the living bones of the mountain. The builders did not simply place their foundation stones on top of this rock. They integrated with it, carving channels and sockets so that the first course of megaliths became a literal extension of the earth itself. This bond eliminated any risk of the fortress sliding or settling independently from the hill it crowns. Archaeologists studying the site have mapped a layout that serves both warrior and engineer. The strategic placement of its three main towers, now only visible as foundations, provided commanding views for defense, yet their positions also distributed the structural load across the hillside, preventing any single point from bearing unsustainable weight. A network of underground chambers known as chincanas likely served as storage, ceremonial spaces, and perhaps even secret passages, but they also functioned as a pressure release system within the soil, managing subsurface water and providing voids that could compress during shaking. Among the countless stones, one stands out as a legend, the so-called Stone of 12 Angles. Nestled in a wall on a narrow street leading from the plaza below, this green diorite block is a masterpiece of polygonal masonry. Its 12 perfectly planed sides interlock with its neighbors in a dizzying three-dimensional puzzle, demonstrating the ultimate goal of creating a continuous, unbroken bearing surface. It is a single stone that embodies the entire patient art of fitting. Some scholars see a deeper symbolism in the fortress's form. The zigzag pattern is a striking visual echo of a lightning bolt, a potent symbol of the Inca weather god Illapa. This was not merely decoration. It was a statement written across the landscape, declaring that the power of the heavens was captured and made manifest in the enduring stone, a permanent claim of divine authority and protection. Constructing such a place was the work of generations. Historians believe the project spanned the reigns of 3 emperors, consuming nearly a century of coordinated labor. The logistics stagger the mind, quarrying the largest stones, some weighing well over 100 tons, from sites miles away, then transporting them up the steep slopes to the hilltop, represents a triumph of the Mita labor system and a profound understanding of physics. The survival of Sacsayhuamán through the centuries is its final, undeniable testimony. Major earthquakes have repeatedly shaken Cusco, including the devastating quake of 1650 that reduced Spanish colonial churches to rubble. Each time the zigzag walls have swayed, their stones dancing in their ancient, prescribed rhythm and then settled back unmoved and unmovable. The Spanish buildings, relying on rigid mortar and straight lines, had to be rebuilt. The Inca fortress, designed from the outset to move with the earth, merely shrugged. In every angled joint, in every anchored foundation, Sacsayhuamán silently teaches the same lesson. true strength is not about rigid resistance, but about intelligent, graceful adaptation. Machu Picchu clings to its ridge like a climber finding balance on a knife's edge. This is not a city placed upon the landscape, it is a city woven into it, a direct response to the land's most volatile whispers. Perched between two active geological faults and cradled by the peaks of Machu Picchu and Huayna Picchu, the site exists in a constant, delicate negotiation with gravity and tectonics. Its survival for over 500 years in one of the world's most seismically active regions is a testament not to luck, but to a profound, integrated design philosophy. The first clue to this philosophy is visible in the very fabric of its walls. The city employs two distinct construction styles, both adhering to core seismic principles. The Sacred Heart of Machu Picchu, its temples and royal enclosures, are built with the finest ashlar masonry. Here, rectangular blocks of white granite are fitted together with that legendary, liquid perfection, creating monolithic walls that could sway as one unified mass. Just steps away, the residential sectors are built with rougher fieldstone, a polygonal style where irregular rocks are locked together in a flexible, energy-absorbing matrix. This was not a matter of hierarchy alone, but of appropriate application, using the most labor-intensive methods where spiritual and structural integrity mattered most. Yet the true engineering genius of Machu Picchu is often hidden beneath the feet of its visitors. The entire city is built upon a foundation of rubble, a deep, engineered fill of crushed rock and gravel that acts as a giant drainage bed. A vast, intricate network of stone channels runs beneath plazas and behind walls, designed to catch rainwater and spring water and whisk it away down the mountainside. Experts in engineering geology emphasize that this was the city's first and most critical line of defense. By preventing water from saturating the soil beneath the foundations, the Inca eliminated the primary trigger for catastrophic landslides, especially during the prolonged shaking of a major earthquake. The site is a masterclass in hydrological management, ensuring the mountain itself remained a stable partner. Nowhere is the harmony between built form and natural world more exquisite than in the Temple of the Sun. This semicircular tower is not built upon the bedrock, it is built with it. The architects incorporated a massive, existing granite outcrop into the very structure, using its natural contours as the altar and shaping their flawless ashlar blocks to embrace it. This direct anchoring to the living rock provided an immovable core, a seismic anchor point for the surrounding architecture. Nearby, the Intihuatana stone, the so-called hitching post of the sun, stands carved from a single piece of bedrock. While its primary purpose was celestial observation and spiritual ritual, its physical form is telling. It is an unshakable protrusion of the mountain itself, a permanent geodetic marker that may have symbolized an eternal, unmoving point in a world of constant motion. The builders also displayed a sophisticated understanding of geological risk beyond earthquakes. The city's layout carefully avoids the natural avalanche chutes that scar the neighboring peaks. Buildings are clustered on stable spurs of rock, with terraces strategically placed to buttress slopes and control erosion. Even their use of a simple clay mortar in some non-critical joints in residential areas shows a pragmatic adaptability, a material that offered slight flexibility without compromising the dry stone principles of the sacred architecture. The evidence of their success is written in the stones themselves. While centuries of jungle growth have dislodged some blocks, archaeological surveys reveal remarkably little damage attributable to seismic activity. The walls have settled, yes, and vegetation has intruded, but there are no signs of the catastrophic, shear-induced collapses that would betray a flawed design. Machu Picchu did not fight the mountain, it learned the mountain's language. Every terrace, every channel, every perfectly fitted stone was part of a continuous conversation with the earth, a dialogue of respect that yielded not just a city, but a legacy of resilience carved into the bones of the Andes. This harmonious integration raises a pivotal question. If their understanding was so complete, so deeply embedded in their culture and landscape, what could possibly threaten a civilization built on such unshakable foundations? The answer arrived from across the ocean, carried by men who spoke a different language and worshipped a different god of conquest. The quest for perfection was a conversation spanning generations. That seamless joint, that dancing wall, was not a sudden revelation. It was a slow, hard-won wisdom, born from the rubble of earlier attempts and refined through centuries of patient observation. This was a culture of iterative design, where knowledge was not stored in libraries but in the calloused hands and sharpened eyes of master masons. Their greatest teacher was failure. We can envision early structures built with simpler techniques, succumbing to the land's inevitable tremors. Each collapse was not a disaster, but a brutal, invaluable lesson. It taught them which stone shapes held, which angles distributed force, and how tight a joint needed to be to allow movement without collapse. They learned by doing, by watching, and by remembering. Historians trace a clear stylistic evolution across the empire. Older sites show more rustic, coursed masonry, where stones are layered in roughly aligned rows. But as you move forward in time to the imperial zenith, the architecture transforms. The simple rows give way to the breathtaking complexity of polygonal fits, a clear sign of accumulated expertise. This progression was a living curriculum, passed from mentor to apprentice on the scaffolding itself. The process was deeply empirical. A mason would try a new technique for shaping a corner block, observe how it performed over years, and then refine the method. They experimented with different local rock types, learning which granites held a sharper edge and which sandstones were best avoided for foundational work. This was innovation through intimate, hands-on dialogue with material and environment. We see this learning timeline etched into the stones of a single site. At Ollantaytambo, you can walk from one sector to another and witness a masonry museum. Some walls feature large, roughly shaped boulders fitted together in a functional but simpler style. Just around the corner, the Temple of the Sun showcases the pinnacle of ashlar precision, with stones so finely joined they seem fused. This variation isn't random. It likely represents different construction phases, showing how techniques were honed even within the lifespan of a major project. This culture of continuous improvement did not emerge in a vacuum. The Inca were brilliant synthesizers, learning from the civilizations that preceded them. The monumental stonework at Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, with its precisely cut blocks and iconic gateway, clearly influenced later Andean building traditions. The Inca observed, adapted, and then advanced these ideas to a scale and sophistication never before seen. The true engine of this innovation was not a lone genius, but a highly organized society that could sustain such long-term projects. The Mita system provided a steady, rotating workforce, ensuring that knowledge was disseminated across a vast region. A mason from Cusco might share a technique with a worker from the coast, who would then adapt it to the stones of his homeland. This created a feedback loop of shared experience, accelerating their collective mastery. Their genius lay not in a single secret formula, but in a cultural commitment to learning from the land itself, one careful, iterative strike of the hammerstone at a time. The final stone was placed by a hand that had traveled for weeks to be there. This is the unseen engine of the empire, the vast human network that turned architectural philosophy into enduring reality. Behind every perfectly fitted joint and every terraced mountainside stood not just a skilled mason, but a meticulously organized society. The Inca did not build with slaves, they built with a system of reciprocal duty known as the Mita. This was the social technology that made the physical technology possible, a cornerstone of their economy where communities contributed labor to state projects in lieu of taxes. Imagine it as a form of rotational public service, where every household across the empire's sprawling territories owed a certain number of days each year to work on projects deemed to benefit the collective good. This could mean building roads, maintaining agricultural terraces, or serving in the army. For monumental construction, the Mita was the mechanism that summoned the workforce. The significance is profound. It mobilized a rotating pool of both specialized and general labor from every corner of the Andes. When a project like Sacsayhuamán or a new temple complex was commissioned, the state would call upon provinces to send their quotas of workers. These were not anonymous crowds. Anthropologists explain that the system ensured a constant supply of skilled stonemasons, engineers, quarrymen, and haulers. Communities would often send the same families year after year, allowing deep, specialized knowledge to develop and be passed down within lineages, even as they fulfilled their civic duty. The workers were provided for during their service. From the vast state storehouses, they received food, clothing, and tools. This logistical support was crucial. A worker from a coastal village arriving in the high-altitude capital of Cusco would be supplied with warm clothing and fed from the stocks of maize, quinoa, and dried potatoes accumulated through the same system of tribute. This meant labor could be directed anywhere, anytime, without devastating local communities by stripping them of their own subsistence. At the head of these immense work crews were the master masons, the Kamayoks. These were the true artists and engineers, individuals who held the sacred knowledge of stone. A Kamayok would direct a team, demonstrating the techniques of pounding and grinding, overseeing the trial fitting of blocks, and ensuring the precise standards of the sacred geometry were met. The construction site itself became a university of stone. A young laborer from the north might work alongside a seasoned cutter from the south, sharing tricks for shaping a particular type of granite or the best angle for a lever. This constant cross-pollination of ideas and methods across a vast empire is what created the stunning uniformity of Inca masonry from Ecuador to Chile. None of this would have been possible without the empire's circulatory system, the Quhapacñan. This immense road network, stretching over 25,000 miles, was the infrastructure that made the Mita system breathe. It was the pathway along which workers traveled to their postings. More than that, it was the conduit for the materials that fed their work. Quarried stones, bronze tools, and supplies from the storehouses all moved along these carefully engineered highways and suspension bridges. The road and the labor system were two parts of a single organism, designed to mobilize the resources of a continent toward a shared vision. This remarkable social coordination raises a practical question. What tools did these mobilized masses actually wield to achieve such impossible precision with nothing but stone, sand, and sinew? The hammerstones are still there, scattered like forgotten prayers at the foot of the walls. These worn river cobbles are the definitive answer to one of history's most persistent fantasies. When confronted with the impossible scale and precision of Inca masonry, a certain line of thought inevitably emerges. It suggests that such wonders could not be the work of human hands alone. Theories swirl of ancient lasers from lost civilizations, extraterrestrial architects, or magical plants that could soften granite like clay. These stories are seductive. They offer a shortcut, a technological deus ex machina that spares us from grappling with the true, staggering reality of human effort. Yet every one of these myths crumbles under the clear, patient light of archaeology and materials science. The evidence for how these walls were built is not hidden. It is lying in plain sight in the quarries, on the unfinished blocks, and in the very tool marks etched into the stone. Expert stonemasons and archaeologists have spent decades studying these sites, and their conclusions are unanimous. This was a gradual, manual, and brilliantly human process. The myth of a stone softening plant, for instance, is a persistent one. The idea is that the Inca possessed a secret botanical extract that could temporarily liquefy rock, allowing them to mold it like plaster. Petrographic analysis, which examines the microscopic structure of stone, delivers a firm verdict. Studies of the granite and andesite in Inca walls show no signs of the chemical alteration or recrystallization that such a process would require. The crystalline structure is intact, showing only the mechanical fractures consistent with pounding and abrasion. Furthermore, if such a miraculous substance existed, why would the quarries be littered with countless hammerstones, and why would the blocks show such clear evidence of trial and error fitting? The answer is because they were shaped the hard way. Another common claim points to seemingly perfect, straight cuts on some blocks as proof of advanced saws or even power tools. A closer look reveals the truth. Those remarkably flat surfaces were achieved through the relentless technique of pounding and grinding. By creating a series of raised bumps and then systematically grinding them down to a common plane, the masons could produce a surface that appears machined to the untrained eye. The process leaves a distinctive texture, a subtle undulation that can be felt and seen under raking light, a fingerprint of human labor that no laser or diamond blade would ever produce. Perhaps the most compelling debunking comes not from theory but from practice. Modern researchers and skilled stonemasons have taken on the challenge. Using only replicas of Inca tools, hammerstones, bronze chisels, and abrasive sand, they have successfully shaped granite blocks and fitted them together with impressive precision. These experiments are not quick. They require weeks or months of dedicated work for a single stone, a powerful demonstration that the techniques are entirely feasible. They are just phenomenally labor-intensive. This leads to a profound and reflective question. Why is our first instinct so often to credit aliens or lost super science for ancient achievements? Perhaps it is because the real story, one of generational patience, coordinated labor, and ingenious problem-solving, feels almost too monumental for us to comprehend in our age of instant results. To accept that humans alone did this is to accept a scale of commitment that humbles our modern sensibilities. Dispelling these myths is not an act of reducing the wonder. It is the opposite. It reclaims the achievement for humanity. It allows us to see the walls not as mysterious relics of an outside force, but as testaments to the pinnacle of human capability, collaboration, and cultural vision. This makes the human story behind the stones even more remarkable, a story of resilience that faced its ultimate, unforeseen test not from the earth, but from a storm arriving from across the sea. The year 1650 brought a verdict written in dust and ruin. A massive earthquake struck the sacred valley, and the city of Cusco convulsed. When the tremors ceased, a stark new landscape emerged. Colonial churches, symbols of the new order with their soaring bell towers and rigid arches, lay in shattered heaps, yet from beneath that rubble, something ancient and unbroken emerged. The original Inca walls, the foundations upon which the Spanish had built their own grand structures, stood completely intact. This was not a coincidence. It was an unintentional, centuries-long experiment that provided the most brutal and convincing proof of Inca engineering genius. The Spanish, upon their arrival, had made a practical, symbolic, and ultimately revealing choice. To demonstrate their dominance, they constructed their most important buildings directly atop the sacred sites of the vanquished empire. They took the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun, and built the Church of Santo Domingo over its flawless walls. They used the immovable foundations of Inca palaces as the footings for their own mansions. In doing so, they created a perfect side-by-side test of two architectural philosophies. The Spanish brought European techniques, relying on lime mortar to bind bricks and stones into rigid, monolithic structures. They favored straight lines, right angles, and long, continuous walls. Their architecture was designed for a different climate and a different geological reality, one that valued permanence through solidity. It was a philosophy of conquest, of imposing a foreign form upon the land. The Inca philosophy, as we have seen, was one of dialogue and dynamic flexibility. When the Earth moved in 1650, these two worldviews collided with seismic force. The rigid Spanish masonry, glued together with mortar, could not flex. It behaved like a single, brittle sheet of glass. The earthquake's energy had nowhere to go but into cracking the structure apart, shattering the mortar bonds and sending walls tumbling in straight, catastrophic lines. Meanwhile, the Inca foundations beneath them simply did what they were designed to do. The dry stone polygonal masonry absorbed the shock. The stone's micros shifted in their intricate dance and then settled back into place. The Spanish buildings did not simply fail. They failed in a way that explicitly revealed the superior system hidden below. Historians of the era recorded the scene with a mixture of terror and awe. They described how the ornate Spanish facades crumbled, exposing the stark, geometric perfection of the Inca stonework that had supported them all along. This experiment was repeated with the same result in the major earthquake of 1950. Once again, colonial-era buildings in Cusco sustained severe damage, while the pre-Columbian foundations demonstrated remarkable resilience. The lesson was etched into the very fabric of the city. You can still see this dramatic contrast today at the Church of Santo Domingo. The curved, mortar-bound wall of the church shows clear signs of damage and reconstruction, a patchwork of repairs across the centuries. Yet jutting defiantly through this colonial canvas is the unmistakable, flowing curve of the original Coricancha wall, its stones fitted together without a gap, having survived every quake unscathed. It is a permanent exhibit in an open-air museum of engineering. The Spanish sometimes reused Inca stones, but in doing so, they often missed the point entirely. They would take a beautifully shaped polygonal block and embed it in a mortar matrix, locking it into a rigid prison. This destroyed the stone's ability to move and interact with its neighbors, nullifying the very property that made it valuable. They saw the stone as a material, not as a component in a brilliant system. This historical accident provides something rare in archaeology: empirical, observable proof. We do not have to guess how an Inca wall would fare in a quake. We can see how it did repeatedly under the immense stress of holding up a collapsing building. It offers a direct physical comparison that silences speculation. The fallen Spanish masonry is the control group in the experiment, and its failure validates the Inca success. This legacy is no longer just a historical curiosity. Modern seismic engineers and architects now study these walls not as relics, but as textbooks. They are reverse engineering the principles of flexibility, energy dissipation, and continuous load distribution, seeking ways to translate this ancient stone wisdom into the steel and concrete of our own cities. The past is speaking, offering solutions for a future where the ground remains just as unpredictable. A seismic damper in a modern skyscraper hums with a purpose an Inca mason would recognize. In engineering laboratories around the world, those ancient walls are no longer mere artifacts. They are living prototypes, their principles being translated into the language of steel and algorithms to protect our own cities. This emerging field looks to nature and ancient wisdom for solutions, a practice known as biomimicry. Here, the irregular puzzle of an Inca wall is studied not for its history, but for its physics, seen as a brilliant, natural model for a flexible building skin that can absorb and redirect immense force. Experts in earthquake engineering now see the Inca's core insight, allowing controlled, ductile movement at a structure's joints as fundamental. We once believed the strongest building was the most rigid. Today, we understand that the safest building is often the one designed to dance. Modern seismic design has, in many ways, been catching up to a very old idea. The most direct descendants of Inca masonry are technologies like base isolation and energy dissipation devices. Imagine a massive building not fixed solidly to the ground, but seated on a series of sliding bearings or flexible pads. During an earthquake, the entire structure can sway or rock independently from the shaking earth below, much like a stone in a polygonal wall micro shifts against its neighbor. Seismic dampers, which look like giant pistons installed within a building's frame, act as the controlled friction of the modern age. They convert the violent kinetic energy of a quake into heat, which is then harmlessly dissipated, precisely mimicking how the countless stone-on-stone contacts in an Inca wall transformed seismic force into minor movement and warmth. Engineers are using advanced computer modeling to deconstruct the Inca wall's magic. They create digital simulations of polygonal masonry, subjecting virtual blocks to simulated quakes to measure exactly how energy travels through that intricate web. The metrics are revealing. The models show how force is redirected along the block's many angled faces, preventing a single catastrophic stress point from forming. This research is informing the design of new composite materials and layered building facades that can flex and return to shape, offering a flexible armor for towers in fault zones. One compelling question arises from all this. In our relentless pursuit of resilience through ever more complex technology, are we sometimes just reinventing what ancient civilizations, through patient observation and deep cultural wisdom, had already perfected? The bridge between that past and our future is being built today, proving the timeless value of their insight. And this wisdom, it turns out, was applied not only to the grand monuments of emperors but to the very homes of everyday people. The most profound wisdom was woven into the walls of the humblest home. While the megalithic temples showcase imperial ambition, the true test of a culture's resilience lies in how it shelters its everyday people. For the Inca, seismic safety was not a secret reserved for priests and emperors. It was a common language spoken in stone and clay, a set of principles so fundamental they shaped the dwellings of every family across the empire. Walk through the residential quarters of an Inca town, away from the ceremonial plazas, and you enter a world of practical, deeply intelligent architecture. The typical family unit lived in a cancha, a walled compound enclosing several simple, rectangular buildings. These homes were single-story, built with fieldstone gathered from nearby slopes and set together with a clay mortar. They appear modest, even rustic, compared to the ashlar masterpieces, yet look closer. The same seismic philosophy guided their construction, simply translated into locally available materials. The walls were thick, tapering inward as they rose, creating that crucial wide base for a low center of gravity. Doorways and niches, even in these utilitarian spaces, were often trapezoidal. The roof was not made of heavy tiles or stone slabs, which could become lethal in a collapse. Instead, it was a lightweight, steeply pitched framework covered in iku grass, a durable native straw. This choice was a masterstroke of risk management. During an earthquake, if the walls did succumb, this roof would crumble into a relatively harmless shower of thatch and light poles, greatly increasing the chances of survival for those inside. This knowledge was not locked away in a codex. It lived in the hands of the community, passed down through practice. Ethnoarchaeologists who study present-day traditional practices to understand the past find these principles alive in Andean villages today. The methods of selecting stone, the communal gathering for a house raising, the intuitive understanding of how to lay a stable course, all echo a continuity of knowledge that spans centuries. Resilience was also social. When a quake did damage, the response was swift and collective. The Mita system functioned at the local level, with neighbors and kin coming together to clear debris and rebuild. Homes were designed not as permanent, unmovable fortresses, but as repairable structures. The clay mortar allowed for easier disassembly and reconstruction than the fused joints of sacred architecture. A damaged wall could be taken down and rebuilt with many of the same stones, a rapid return to stability that prioritized community continuity over monumental permanence. You can see this elegant, everyday application at sites like Pisac in the Sacred Valley. Its sprawling residential terraces are dotted with the foundations and lower walls of countless homes. Studying their layout reveals a careful adaptation to the slope, with compounds staggered to avoid creating long, vulnerable rows. The use of local stone and the consistent, gravity-defying forms show that the empire's greatest engineering triumph was its democratization of safety. This was a culture where, from the grandest temple to the simplest farmhouse, every wall was built with the same respectful conversation with the earth. It raises a poignant reflection. In our modern world, where cutting-edge seismic technology often comes with a high cost, what does it mean to make resilience a universal right, a cultural norm accessible to all? The answer, perhaps, lies not in complex imported solutions, but in rediscovering the profound intelligence embedded in local materials and collective memory. The hillside is a workshop where time simply stopped. At Ollantaytambo, the monumental stones tell a story not just of completion, but of a process frozen in mid-breath. Here, scattered along the ancient pathways, lie the sleeping giants, immense blocks of red porphyry and granite that were never awakened into walls. They are the empire's unfinished sentences, and they offer us something priceless, a tangible, step-by-step manual of Inca engineering. These stones are not ruins, they are a time capsule capturing the exact moment when the hammerstones fell silent. Walk with your eyes along the flanks of the mountain. You will first see the quarries themselves, great wounds in the rock face where the stone was born. Then, tracing the path down toward the temple complex, you encounter the blocks in every stage of becoming. Some are still attached to the living bedrock, partially outlined by channels cut for their extraction. Others have been freed, massive rectangular forms resting on the slope, their surfaces still rough and scarred with the marks of the initial shaping. The most telling stones are those that show the next critical phase. Look closely, and you will see a series of rounded protrusions left on their faces. These are the bosses, the temporary handles we discussed earlier. They were not decorative, they were functional, carved to provide grip for the ropes and levers that would maneuver these 100-ton masses. On an unfinished block, you can run your hand over these bumps, feeling the transition from the rough outer surface to the smoother, dressed area beginning to emerge around them. It is a physical record of the mason's logic, a clear sequence written in stone. The path these stones were meant to travel is still etched into the landscape. Earthen ramps, engineered with retaining walls, zigzag up the steep slope from the valley floor to the Sun Temple platform. You can stand on them today. They are the very road these sleeping giants were meant to walk, a permanent sketch of the intended route. Seeing the ramps alongside the abandoned blocks creates a powerful, almost cinematic understanding of the scale. You can visualize the teams of workers, the rhythmic pull on the hide ropes, the slow, grinding ascent that was underway. Then the work stopped. The prevailing theory points to the arrival of the Spanish and the upheaval of conquest. The workers, perhaps called to defend their empire or their lives, set down their tools and never returned. This interruption, while a historical tragedy, gifted archaeology with an unparalleled snapshot. Because the process was frozen, we can see the exact methods without guesswork. Expert stonemasons studying these blocks can point to the specific angle of a fracture, showing how they exploited the rock's natural grain. They can trace the progression from the deep, coarse strikes of the initial quarrying to the finer, more precise pecking of the dressing stage. Every mark is a verb in the language of construction. What emerges from this frozen moment is a profound appreciation for the geometry involved. It was not brute force. Shaping these irregular polygonal blocks required a sophisticated spatial intelligence. The masons were not just carving a shape, they were anticipating how this unique piece would interlock with its unseen neighbors in a wall miles away. The bosses, the angles, the gradual smoothing, all speak to a mind holding a complex three-dimensional puzzle. To study these stones is to reverse engineer confidence. The myths of lost technology or supernatural aid evaporate in the face of this plain, physical evidence of human skill, patience, and a sudden, silent end. This tangible proof of their method makes the final fate of their knowledge all the more poignant, a story not of geological failure, but of a historical collision that changed everything. The stonecutter's mind held a map his hands could feel. Without a single written blueprint or standard unit of measurement, an Inca mason faced a problem of staggering complexity. His task was to take a raw, multi-ton block of granite and carve it so that it would lock perfectly into a gap in a wall, a gap bounded on all sides by stones of completely different, irregular shapes. This was not assembly, it was three-dimensional sculptural integration, a puzzle where every piece was unique and the final image was structural immortality. How did he do it? The answer lies in a form of intelligence honed to a razor's edge, a fusion of geometry, touch, and memory that turned the construction site into a living, tactile calculator. Cognitive archaeologists studying such ancient crafts speak of an intuitive mastery born from total immersion. From a young age, an apprentice would not learn from diagrams but from the stone itself. He would spend years watching, fetching tools, and performing simple tasks, absorbing the rhythms and relationships through his eyes and hands. This long apprenticeship trained a specialized spatial reasoning, an ability to visualize complex forms and their inversions purely in the mind. The mason did not see a block and a hole. He saw a single, continuous volume of space that needed to be filled. The neighboring stones were not obstacles, they were the only template that mattered. The process was one of relentless iteration and direct feedback. First, the rough block would be maneuvered close to its intended home, using simple, brilliant tools, a length of knotted string for comparative measurement, a water level made from a hollowed stalk to find true horizontal, a weighted cord as a plumb bob. The mason would establish key reference points. But these tools were guides, not dictators. The real work happened through a ritual of trial and error. The block would be painstakingly levered into position for a dry fit. Any high spots preventing contact would be marked, often with a dab of colored clay or soot from a torch. The block would then be lowered, and those marked areas would be ground down with hammerstones and abrasive sand. This cycle of fit, mark, and adjust might be repeated dozens, even hundreds of times for a single stone. For the most complex joins, researchers suggest they may have used a direct impression method. They could press wet clay or mud into the cavity of the weighting gap, creating a negative mold. This mold could then be held against the new block, providing a physical map of the exact, irregular shape that needed to be carved. This tangible guide, combined with constant dry fitting, allowed for incremental removal of stone with astonishing control. It was a conversation where the wall spoke its needs and the mason listened with his tools. The legendary stone of 12 angles in Cusco is the ultimate testament to this cognitive art. That single block of diorite, with its 12 perfectly planed faces, each meeting a different neighbor, is not a mysterious anomaly. It is the logical pinnacle of this system. To create it, a mason had to hold in his mind the exact spatial relationship with a dozen other stones simultaneously, understanding how forces would travel across each unique interface. He was not carving a shape, he was engineering a nexus within a web of pressure. This deep, tactile intelligence transformed inert rock into a dynamic system. Each perfectly fitted joint was a cognitive triumph, a point where human understanding became permanently embedded in the landscape. The mason knew his work was not done when the stone looked right. It was done only when it felt right, when it slipped into its space with a final, satisfying absence of movement, becoming a silent partner in a structure designed to dance. This hard-won mastery, however, was about to face a force for which no amount of geometric genius could prepare, a force that arrived not from the shifting earth, but from across the sea, carrying a different kind of blueprint entirely. The sound of water was the city's quiet heartbeat. For the Inca, this was not merely a resource for drinking or farming. It was a dynamic force to be understood, respected, and meticulously choreographed. Their mastery of hydrology was the invisible shield protecting their stonework, a 10th principle where liquid and rock worked in concert to defy the shaking earth. Water, if left uncontrolled, is architecture's silent assassin. It seeps into foundations, saturates soil, and during an earthquake can trigger a phenomenon as terrifying as it is destructive: liquefaction. This is when water-logged ground, subjected to violent shaking, temporarily loses all its strength and behaves like a liquid quicksand. Buildings, no matter how perfectly their stones are fitted, can sink, tilt, or topple as the solid earth beneath them vanishes. The Inca engineers were brilliant hydrogeologists who designed their cities to never let this happen. Their solution was a proactive, elegant network that managed water from the moment it fell as rain. Before a single foundation stone was laid, they read the land's hydrological story. They identified natural springs, mapped seasonal runoff paths, and understood the water table. Then they built not just on the land, but with a complete drainage system woven into its fabric. At Machu Picchu, this system is a masterpiece of foresight. The entire city is built upon a deep foundation of crushed rock, a deliberately engineered layer that acts as a giant drainage bed, but the true genius lies in the details. Over 130 stone drainage outlets are carved into the retaining walls throughout the site. These are not afterthoughts. They are integral components positioned at the base of terraces and behind buildings to catch every trickle of groundwater or rainfall and whisk it away down the mountainside. The channels themselves are works of stone joining art, carefully sloped and fitted to prevent leaks that could undermine the very walls they were meant to protect. Look closer at the agricultural terraces, and you find vertical drains built into their layered fill. These acted like release valves, allowing pent-up water pressure from within the soil to escape upwards during heavy rains, preventing it from building up and pushing against the terrace walls. Even the beautiful ceremonial fountains, like the series fed by a spring at Machu Picchu, served a dual purpose. While they provided fresh water, the constant flow through their stone channels also functioned as a regulated pressure release, steadily diverting a water source away from critical foundations. This holistic integration meant water was never a threat. It was always a guest with a designated path, welcomed and then guided respectfully away. The result was a perpetually dry, stable platform. The soil beneath their megaliths remained compact and strong, its load-bearing capacity intact even during the worst tremors. Modern hydrogeologists studying these sites express profound admiration. The Inca did not fight water with brute force. They collaborated with it, using gravity and geometry to turn a potential enemy into an ally of stability. This seamless fusion of hydrology and masonry reveals the final, overarching truth. Inca engineering was never a collection of isolated tricks. It was a symphony where the selection of stone, the geometry of the wall, the shaping of the land, and the management of water were all interconnected movements in a single, brilliant composition for enduring resilience. The conquerors had to learn from the conquered. In the decades and centuries after the Spanish arrival, a quiet, pragmatic revolution unfolded in the stonework of the Andes. Despite their initial campaign to dismantle the old order, the colonists faced an unyielding teacher, the earth itself. After each devastating earthquake shattered their European-style buildings, they were left staring at the same undeniable truth: the Inca foundations beneath them remained unbroken. Out of sheer necessity, a profound architectural fusion was born. This blending gave rise to what historians call the mestizo style, a hybrid where Spanish forms met indigenous wisdom. Colonial churches and mansions began to rise with dramatically thicker walls, their lower courses often built from repurposed Inca stones or new blocks fitted with a similar, careful attention. The graceful arches and ornate facades of Europe were now supported by a base that understood the local ground. This was more than a stylistic choice, it was a tacit, monumental admission. For survival in this volatile land, local knowledge was superior. This hard-won lesson began to shape official policy. Following catastrophic quakes in cities like Lima, colonial authorities implemented some of the world's earliest seismic building codes. They mandated thicker walls, limited building heights, and required more robust foundations, regulations directly influenced by observing the performance of pre-Columbian structures. The legacy became a living tradition, most vividly seen in the White City of Arequipa. Here, builders worked with silla, a soft, luminous volcanic stone. Using tools and techniques that would feel familiar to an Inca mason, they carved this stone into elaborate Baroque facades for cathedrals and convents. The result is a breathtaking paradox, ornate European designs rendered in a material and a method born from the ancient Andes, creating a cityscape uniquely adapted to its seismic home. Today, this legacy is not locked in the past, it is a blueprint for the future. In remote Andean villages, traditional methods of building with adobe and stone, employing principles of flexible design and good foundations, have never disappeared. Modern engineers and humanitarian organizations now partner with these communities, not to replace their knowledge but to refine it. Groups are teaching improved traditional techniques, blending ancient seismic principles with modern material science to create disaster-resistant, sustainable, and culturally appropriate housing. They reinforce adobe with natural fibers for flexibility and improve drainage around foundations, proving that the oldest solutions, when understood deeply, can be the most forward-thinking. This continuity across centuries offers a powerful reflection. In our search for resilience, we often chase complex new technologies. Yet sometimes, the most profound innovation is not about inventing something entirely new, but about rediscovering and preserving the timeless intelligence already etched into the landscape by those who listen to it most closely. We have journeyed through quarries, across mountains, and into the mines of the Inca stonemasons, uncovering a story not of alien intervention, but of human brilliance honed by necessity and reverence for the earth. The key takeaways are clear. Their earthquake-proof megaliths were the result of meticulous material selection, listening for the ringing tone of perfect stone. They were shaped by painstaking effort, a conversation of hammerstones that lasted lifetimes. Their strength emerged from ingenious polygonal design, a flexible puzzle that danced with seismic waves rather than fighting them. And all of this was built upon a holistic philosophy, a sacred reciprocity that saw construction as a dialogue with a living landscape. These principles of flexibility, friction, and foundational integrity are not locked in the past. They echo in the laboratories of modern seismic engineers who now design buildings to sway and dampen energy, finally catching up to a very ancient idea. The real lesson may be one of perspective. In an age of specialization, we often isolate problems. Geology, architecture, and spirituality are separate fields. For the Inca, they were a single, flowing discipline. Their cosmology informed their hydrology, which dictated their foundation work, which guided their stone shaping. Every wall was a physical prayer to the mountain, and every tremor was a test of that covenant. This integrated vision challenges our modern, often siloed, approach to the world's great challenges. What might we achieve if we began to see our own systems with that same interconnected wisdom? The architect Frank Lloyd Wright once reflected that the mother art is architecture, and that without an architecture of our own, we have no soul of our own civilization. The Inca gave their civilization a soul of stone, one that still speaks from the high Andes, teaching us that true resilience is not about defying nature, but about learning its deepest rhythms. If you found this exploration of ancient wisdom illuminating, we have many more journeys into historical mysteries waiting for you. Subscribe to continue discovering the hidden intelligence of the past. And we would love to hear from you which Inca engineering feat amazes you the most. Is it the impossible transport of the megaliths, the knife-edged joints, or the sacred geometry of their cities? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The stones have stood for centuries. Their silent lessons are waiting for us to learn.